The billionaire gave his credit card to the deaf girl, thinking she would buy expensive things. But when he saw what she actually bought, he couldn't hold back the tears. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Michael Anderson stood in his office on the 42nd floor, looking down at the bustling streets of Manhattan. At 30 years old, he had built an empire worth $15 billion. But something gnawed at his soul. People called him brilliant, ruthless, successful. What they didn't know was how empty he felt inside. Success without purpose is just expensive loneliness, his grandmother used to say. Her words echoed in his head as he observed the small figures below, each with their own dreams and struggles. That morning, Michael had decided to conduct an experiment. He had heard too many stories about human greed, about how money corrupted even the purest hearts. He wanted to test this theory, prove once and for all that people were fundamentally selfish when given the chance. His assistant knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Anderson, the car is waiting." Michael took his platinum card, the one without limits, and headed to Central Park. He had chosen this place carefully. Families gathered here, children played, and life moved at a gentler pace than the corporate world he inhabited. As he walked along the tree-lined path, his eyes fell on a small figure sitting alone on a worn bench. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with golden curls and worn clothes that had seen better days. She was watching other children play, but something was different about her response to their calls. Michael approached cautiously. The child looked at him with the most striking blue eyes he had ever seen, eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years, but also a deep sadness. If you were Michael in this moment, what would you do? Leave your answer in the comments. "Hello," Michael said gently, sitting beside her. The little girl smiled, but didn't respond verbally. Instead, she pointed to her ears and shook her head, then made simple signs with her hands. Michael felt a stab in his chest. She was deaf. This wasn't part of his plan, but something about her innocent presence drew him in. He took out his phone and wrote, "What's your name?" She read the screen and her face lit up. She took the phone and carefully wrote back, "Emma Davis, I'm 7 years old." "I'm Michael," he wrote. "Are you here alone?" "Grandma is at the doctor nearby. She's sick. I'm waiting here." Michael studied Emma's face. This wasn't the typical test subject he had envisioned, but perhaps it made everything even more meaningful. Here was a child who couldn't hear, facing challenges he couldn't understand, waiting for a sick grandmother. He made an impulsive decision. Michael took out his credit card and wrote on the phone, "Emma, I want to give you something. This card can buy anything you want, anything. Would you like to use it?" Emma's eyes widened as she read the message. She looked at the gleaming card, then back at Michael, with clear confusion on her face. "Really?" she wrote back. Michael nodded, his heart beating fast. This was the moment, his test of human nature. What would this seemingly innocent child do when given unlimited purchasing power? "The shopping center is just 2 blocks from here," he wrote. "I'll come with you. You can buy whatever makes you happy." Emma held the card carefully, as if it were made of glass. She looked at Michael with those piercing blue eyes, and for a moment he wondered if she could see straight into his cynical soul. What would she choose? Michael walked beside Emma through the glittering corridors of Manhattan Mall, his heart pounding with anticipation. The polished marble floors reflected the bright lights from countless stores, and shoppers moved around them with arms full of designer bags and luxury goods. This was the moment of truth that would confirm his cynical views about human nature. Emma stopped in front of the first store, Game World, a massive entertainment complex with elaborate window displays showing the latest gaming consoles, virtual reality headsets, designer dolls worth hundreds of dollars, and expensive gadgets that most children could only dream of owning. The colorful lights blinked invitingly, and Michael could see other children inside, mesmerized by the displays. Michael waited, phone ready to write. Surely she would be tempted by these flashy items like any other child. This was where his experiment would prove that even the most seemingly innocent person would give in to material temptation when given unlimited resources. But Emma walked past the toy store without a second glance. She continued down the corridor, her small hand holding the credit card tightly, her blue eyes examining each storefront with purpose rather than desire. Michael followed, becoming more and more confused with each step. They passed Kids Fashion, an exclusive children's boutique with beautiful dresses and designer shoes displayed like precious jewels. They passed the jewelry store with sparkling gems that caught the light. They passed the Apple store, where teenagers flocked around the latest tablets and phones. Emma ignored everything completely. Michael felt his carefully constructed theory beginning to waver. Where was the greed he had expected? Where was the unbridled desire for expensive objects? This little girl was walking through a temple of consumerism with the determination of someone who knew exactly what she needed. Finally, she stopped in front of a small, modest store tucked between a trendy cafe and a bookstore. The simple sign read, "Hearing and Life," and the humble storefront displayed hearing aids, mobility equipment, blood pressure monitors, and various medical devices. It was the type of store most people walked past without noticing. Michael's throat tightened with an emotion he couldn't name. He quickly wrote on the phone, "Emma, are you sure you want to shop here? You can have anything in this entire mall." She nodded solemnly and pointed to the hearing aids in the window, then placed her small hand on her heart. She took the phone and wrote slowly and carefully, "I want to hear the birds sing. Grandma Dorothy tells me they sound like angels calling from heaven. She says Mama and Papa can hear them now too." For the first time in years, Michael Anderson felt his cynical worldview beginning to crack like ice in spring. This wasn't the greed he had expected to witness. It was something entirely different, something pure and selfless that challenged everything he thought he knew about people. If this story touches your heart, give it a thumbs up to help more people find this message. Emma pushed open the store door with both hands, and Michael followed, his thoughts swirling with the implications of what he was witnessing. What had he gotten himself into? Inside Hearing and Life, the atmosphere was quiet and professional, very different from the flashy retail stores they had just passed. A friendly woman around 50 approached them, her gentle demeanor immediately calming Emma. Dr. Sarah Collins had been an audiologist for 20 years, helping people reconnect to the world of sound, but she had never seen a 7-year-old girl walk into her store with a platinum credit card and such determined purpose. Emma showed the card and pointed to the hearing aids, then made signs toward her ears. Dr. Collins' trained eye immediately recognized the signs. This child was profoundly deaf and had been for some time. Dr. Collins looked questioningly at Michael, her professional instincts alert to this unusual situation. "I'm helping her buy what she needs," Michael explained, taking out his phone to write the message Emma could read. Dr. Collins' face lit up with understanding, and she knelt down to Emma's level and began communicating in fluent American Sign Language. Emma's entire face transformed with joy. Finally, someone who could speak her language, someone who understood her world of silence. Michael watched fascinated as the two engaged in animated conversation. Emma's hands moved expressively telling her story, while Dr. Collins nodded with growing compassion and occasionally exclaimed in surprise. After several minutes of intense communication, Dr. Collins turned to Michael with tears forming in her eyes. Her voice was hoarse with emotion as she spoke. "This little girl hasn't been able to afford hearing aids since her parents died in a car accident 8 months ago," she explained quietly, looking back at Emma with maternal concern. "She lives with her grandmother, Mrs. Dorothy Davis, who has been struggling with her own serious medical bills and can barely keep food on the table." Michael felt as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. He had expected to expose human greed, but instead was witnessing a depth of sacrifice and love that challenged everything he believed about people and their motives. "She says grandmother sold her own hearing aids last month to buy Emma school supplies and winter clothes," Dr. Collins continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Davis is nearly deaf now too, and both are living in almost complete silence. Emma reads lips, but it's not the same as hearing the world around you. Emma tugged at Dr. Collins's sleeve and signed something urgently, her little face full of hope and determination. Dr. Collins smiled through tears as she translated. She wants to know if there are hearing aids for grandmother too. She says Mrs. Davis used to tell beautiful stories about all the sounds in the world. Music, laughter, rain on windows, birds singing in the morning. She wants them to experience these sounds together. Michael looked at this little girl who was using unlimited purchasing power, not for toys or candy, but to reconnect to the world and help the person she loved most. His hands shook slightly as he wrote, "Get everything she needs, everything they both need, the best you have." But Emma wasn't finished with her plans for that credit card. She had much more in mind, and Michael was about to discover just how deep this little girl's capacity for love and sacrifice truly was. After spending nearly 2 hours getting the proper fitting for state-of-the-art hearing aids, both Emma and her grandmother would receive the most advanced models available. Emma led Michael to her next destination with the same purposeful determination she had shown at the medical store. Michael expected they could go home so Emma could surprise grandmother with the wonderful gift, but Emma had entirely different plans. She walked with surprising confidence through Manhattan's busy streets, navigating crosswalks and crowds with the heightened awareness that many deaf people develop. Michael noticed how she moved through the world, carefully observing everything around her, reading lips when people turned in her direction, using visual cues that hearing people often missed, missing nothing despite her hearing impairment. They stopped in front of Brooklyn Pharmacy, a neighborhood institution that had served the community for over 30 years. The modest storefront was squeezed between a laundromat and a small bakery, and through the windows, Michael could see it was the type of family business that provided personal service to customers who had become like family over the years. Inside the pharmacy, Emma approached the prescription counter with a confidence that surprised Michael. She pulled out a carefully folded and worn piece of paper from her little jacket pocket and held it out with both hands as if it was something precious. The middle-aged pharmacist, Mr. Robert Thompson, recognized Emma immediately. His face lit up with genuine affection as he spoke, though Michael realized Emma couldn't hear his words. "Hello, sweetheart. Is Grandma Dorothy with you today?" Emma shook her head and pointed to Michael, then showed the platinum card. "Mr. Thompson's expression changed from friendly recognition to confusion as he tried to process this unexpected situation. Michael stepped forward and explained their unusual arrangement, watching Mr. Thompson's face become increasingly serious as he examined the prescription list Emma had brought. "These medications are for advanced type 2 diabetes and serious heart conditions," Mr. Thompson explained to Michael, his voice heavy with concern. "This little girl comes here every month with grandmother's prescriptions, but—" He lowered his voice and looked at Emma with deep sorrow. "They can usually only afford about half of what's actually prescribed. Grandmother lets Emma choose which medicines are most important each month." Michael felt his chest tighten with a pain he hadn't experienced since his own grandmother's death. "What do you mean, choose?" Mr. Thompson sighed deeply. "Sometimes they leave the heart medication to pay for insulin shots. Other times, they take pain medication for Mrs. Davis's arthritis instead of blood pressure pills. Last month, they could only pay for diabetes supplies, so Mrs. Davis went without her heart medication for 3 weeks. It's heartbreaking, really. This little girl has been making life and death decisions about grandmother's health for months, and she understands exactly what each choice means." Emma tugged at Michael's jacket and held his phone, having written a message that made his throat close with emotion. "Grandma Dorothy tries not to cry when her chest hurts at night. She thinks I don't see because I'm sleeping, but I always watch her face. She holds her chest and breathes slowly. Sometimes I pretend to sleep when she cries." Michael knelt down to Emma's eye level, overwhelmed by the burden this child had been carrying. This 7-year-old girl had endured burdens that would have crushed most adults, making impossible choices about her beloved grandmother's survival. "Fill everything on that list," Michael said to Mr. Thompson, his voice stronger than he felt. "Fill it for the next 6 months and add anything else you might need." But as they left the pharmacy with several bags full of life-saving medications, Michael realized Emma still wasn't finished. She had one more stop planned, and this final destination would reveal the true depth of her extraordinary character. As they walked toward Emma's final destination, Michael found himself thinking about his own childhood in ways he hadn't for years. He had grown up with every conceivable advantage: private schools where teachers knew his name, trust funds that guaranteed he would never want for anything, opportunities served on silver platters by adults eager to win favor with his wealthy family. He had had nannies, tutors, chauffeurs, and every material comfort a child could wish for. Yet somewhere along the way, he had become bitter and suspicious of others' motives, convinced that people were fundamentally selfish and that everyone had a price. His success in business had only reinforced these beliefs. He had seen executives betray companies for money, friends abandon each other for profit, and family members fight viciously over inheritances. Emma suddenly stopped and gently tugged his arm. She held his phone, having written a message that cut straight to his heart. "Are you sad? Your face looks just like Grandma Dorothy's when she sits by the window thinking about Mama and Papa." Michael stared at the screen, speechless. This 7-year-old child had just seen through 30 years of carefully constructed emotional armor with a single observation. Her intuitive understanding of pain and loss was remarkable. He took the phone and slowly wrote back, "I'm thinking about my own family. My grandmother raised me too after my parents died in a plane crash when I was 12. I miss her every day." Emma's blue eyes widened with sudden understanding and recognition. Without hesitation, she reached out and took his hand, a simple gesture that somehow broke something loose in Michael's chest, releasing emotions he had kept locked away for years. "Grandma Dorothy says angels in heaven send us special people when we need them most," Emma wrote with one hand, while holding his with the other. "Maybe you're my angel today, and maybe I'm supposed to be yours too." Michael had to turn away to collect himself, overwhelmed by this child's profound wisdom. He had spent decades believing that wealth was the ultimate measure of a person's worth, that success meant accumulating more money and power than everyone else around you. But this little girl, with practically nothing material to her name, possessed a wealth of spirit and depth of character that shamed his billions. "My grandmother used to tell me the same thing," he wrote back when he could see clearly again. "She said love was the only currency that counted in the end. I had completely forgotten that until now." They continued walking hand in hand, and Michael realized with striking clarity that Emma wasn't the one being tested today. It was him. Every choice she made, every act of pure altruism held up a mirror to his own life, forcing him to confront the man he had become versus the person grandmother had raised him to be. Emma stopped in front of a small corner grocery store. The faded sign read, "Johnson's Market, family owned since 1962. Through the window, Michael could see it was the type of neighborhood institution that had struggled to compete with big supermarket chains, the kind of place where the owner knew every customer's name and their family histories. Emma had one final purchase to make, and Michael suspected it would be the most revealing yet. Inside Johnson's Market, the warm aroma of fresh bread and herbs filled the air, creating an atmosphere that reminded Michael of his grandmother's kitchen. An elderly man behind the counter smiled warmly when he saw Emma, his weathered face lighting up with genuine affection. "Emma, my little girl, where's Mrs. Dorothy today?" called Mr. William Johnson, speaking slowly so Emma could read his lips. He had learned over the months to position himself in front of her when speaking, understanding her need to see his words. Emma pointed to Michael and showed her credit card. Mr. Johnson's wrinkled face became confused as he tried to process this unexpected situation. This little girl, who usually counted food stamps and small change, now had a platinum credit card. Michael stepped forward and explained their unusual shopping arrangement, watching Mr. Johnson's expression change from confusion to deep concern. "Ah, my dear friend, you don't understand. Mr. Johnson said, his voice laden with emotion. "This little angel, she comes here every week with the food stamps." But he shook his grey head sadly. "The government money never lasts the whole month. During the last week before new stamps come, she arrives here with empty pockets, asking if she can sweep my floors or organize my shelves for a loaf of bread and maybe some milk." Michael felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. He watched Emma go through the small store, not taking snacks or candy like most children would if given unlimited purchasing power. Instead, she moved methodically through the aisles, selecting items from what seemed to be a carefully memorized mental list: milk, bread, eggs, fresh vegetables, fruit, chicken, rice, pasta, all the basic necessities most people took for granted. But then she began adding items that surprised Michael with their thoughtfulness. Special sugar-free snacks designed for diabetics, herbal tea specifically for anxiety and sleep problems, and a small birthday cake from the refrigerated case. "Whose birthday is it?" Michael wrote on his phone. Emma's face became a little sad as she read his question. "Grandma Dorothy's birthday was last month, October 15th. We couldn't afford a cake, so she pretended to forget her own birthday. But I saw her look at the calendar that morning and get very sad for a few minutes before she smiled at me." Mr. Johnson overheard the conversation and translated Emma's signs for Michael. "This little girl, she remembers everything that makes grandmother happy. Last Christmas, she gave Mrs. Davis a drawing she had made at school because there was no money for real presents. Mrs. Davis cried for an hour, but they were tears of joy. You understand? Tears of pure love." As Emma continued shopping, she did something that left Michael completely speechless. She began selecting items for Mr. Johnson's family too. She had noticed his young grandson, Tyler, who helped in the store after school, and somehow knew that the Johnson family had been struggling financially since Mr. Johnson's wife, Mrs. Helen, became ill with cancer 6 months earlier. "Emma, what are you doing?" Michael wrote, watching her place children's vitamins and school supplies in the cart. "Mr. Johnson gave me free bread 3 different times when we had absolutely no food," Emma wrote back, her small fingers working carefully on the phone screen. "His wife is sick like Grandma Dorothy, and his grandson Tyler is hungry sometimes too. I can see it in his eyes. Grandma Dorothy always says, when someone helps you, you help other people when you can. It's like a circle of kindness that never stops." Michael watched in amazement as this 7-year-old girl created an expanding chain of generosity with his money. She wasn't just solving her own family's problems, she was lifting up everyone around her who had shown kindness during their darkest times. Do you know someone like Emma, who always thinks of others first? Share this story with that special person. When they finished shopping at Johnson's Market, Emma had spent less money than most wealthy people would spend on a single dinner at a fine restaurant. But with these modest, thoughtful purchases, she had bought months of vital medication for grandmother, given them both the precious gift of hearing, ensured they would have nutritious food for weeks, helped another family in need, and created moments of joy and celebration that had been missing from their lives. Michael realized his cynical test had not just failed, it had gone completely wrong in the most beautiful possible way. Emma had not revealed the greed and selfishness in human nature he had expected to find. Instead, she had revealed humanity's incredible capacity for pure, selfless love and the transformative power of genuine kindness. But Emma had one last surprise waiting for Michael, something that would change his life forever and challenge him to become the man grandmother had always believed he could be. Emma tugged at Michael's arm and pointed toward the subway entrance. "Grandma Dorothy will worry if I'm late," she wrote on her phone. "She gets scared when I'm not there to help her take her medicines at the right times." Michael realized he was about to see where Emma lived, the world that had shaped this extraordinary child. They descended into the subway, Emma navigating the crowded platform with practiced ease despite her disability. She held Michael's hand protectively, as if she were the adult, guiding him through unfamiliar terrain. The train ride took them to Queens. far from Manhattan's gleaming towers where Michael ran his business empire. As they walked through the neighborhood, Michael saw corner stores with iron bars on windows, apartment buildings with peeling paint, and sidewalks cracked by years of neglect. Yet Emma moved through these streets with the confidence of someone who was deeply loved by this community. "Mr. Rodriguez always waves to me," Emma wrote, pointing to an elderly man sitting on his steps. "Mrs. Jackson from the second floor brings soup when Grandma Dorothy has bad days. Everyone here takes care of each other." They stopped in front of a narrow, 5-story building that had clearly seen better decades. The brick facade was stained with age, and several windows were covered with plastic instead of glass. Emma led him up 3 flights of stairs that creaked ominously under their weight. The hallway smelled of spices from kitchens and old building dampness. Emma knocked on door 3B with a specific pattern. 3 short knocks, then 2 long ones. Michael heard shuffling footsteps from inside, and then the sound of several locks being opened. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 70s with silver-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite her obvious frailty and worry lines etched deep in her face, Mrs. Dorothy Davis had kind eyes that brightened when she saw Emma. "My precious girl," Mrs. Davis said, though Michael noticed she spoke loudly, a sign of her hearing loss. "I was starting to worry. Who is this gentleman with you?" Emma hugged grandmother tightly, then began explaining through signs and lip reading. Michael watched Mrs. Davis's expression change from confusion to surprise to tears as she began to understand what had happened. "You gave your credit card to her?" Mrs. Davis asked Michael directly, her voice shaking with disbelief. "A complete stranger, and she bought hearing aids." Michael nodded, finding himself unable to speak as he looked around the small apartment. The furniture was old, but meticulously clean. The walls were covered with Emma's artwork and school certificates. A small table held several prescription bottles, most empty, and a calendar marked with doctor appointments they probably couldn't afford to keep. Mrs. Davis sank into her worn armchair and covered her face with her hands. "I have failed her so terribly," she whispered. "A 7-year-old girl shouldn't have to choose between grandmother's heart medicine and her own hearing. What kind of life have I given her?" Emma immediately went to grandmother's side and wrapped her small arms around Mrs. Davis's shoulders. She took Michael's phone and wrote a message, showing it to both adults. "Grandma Dorothy gave me love. That's worth more than anything in the whole world." Michael felt something open inside his chest. He was witnessing a type of wealth he had never understood. The wealth of unconditional love between 2 people who had nothing material but everything that truly mattered. But when Mrs. Davis tried on her new hearing aids with shaking hands, hearing clearly for the first time in months, Michael realized this was only the beginning of his education about what it truly meant to live. Mrs. Davis's transformation, when she heard clearly for the first time in months, was nothing short of miraculous. Her eyes filled with wonder as everyday sounds flowed back into her world. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old wall clock, the distant sounds of traffic and children playing outside. But it was Emma's voice that opened her heart completely. "Grandma Dorothy," Emma whispered tentatively, testing her own new hearing aids. "Can you hear me? Really hear me?" Mrs. Davis burst into tears and reached out to Emma with shaking hands. "Oh, my beautiful girl, your voice is even more lovely than I remembered." Michael stood in the corner of the small living room, feeling like an intruder in this sacred moment. These 2 had been living in silence for months, communicating through touch and signs, but now they could hear each other's voices again. "Tell me about the birds, Grandma," Emma said gently. "Tell me how they really sound." Mrs. Davis wiped her eyes and listened carefully to the sounds coming through the open window. "Can you hear them, dear one? That's a robin. Hear how it sounds like it's singing a melody, and that little chirping is a sparrow. Oh, Emma, we can hear God's music again." Michael watched Emma's face light up with pure joy as she discovered the world of sound. Every sound was a miracle to her: the whistle of the tea kettle, the rustling of newspaper pages, even the creaking of the floorboards under her feet. "Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Davis," said suddenly, turning to Michael with dignity, despite her worn clothes and humble surroundings. "I don't know why you helped us, but I need you to understand something. Emma is not a charity case. She is the most remarkable person I have ever known." Mrs. Davis went to her small bookshelf and pulled out a photo album. Emma's parents, my daughter Sarah and her husband David, died when a drunk driver ran a red light 8 months ago. Emma was in the car, but survived with only minor injuries. The trauma caused her hearing loss. Doctors said it was psychological first, then became physical. Michael studied pictures of a happy young family. Emma's parents seemed to be the type of people who had built their lives around love rather than money. "Emma could have become bitter," Mrs. Davis continued. "She could have become angry at the world, angry at God. Instead, she became my caregiver. At 7 years old, she reminds me to take my medicines. She helps me read fine print. She holds my arm when my arthritis makes it hard to walk." Emma looked up from where she had been listening to the different sounds in their apartment. "Grandma Dorothy taught me that being sad doesn't help anyone. She says, Mama and Papa want us to find happiness again, even without them." Michael felt his throat tighten. He had built a fortune by being calculating and strategic, always thinking 3 moves ahead of his competitors. But this little girl had faced crushing loss and responded with grace and generosity that shamed his life's accomplishments. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Davis said quietly. "Emma doesn't know this, but we're being evicted next week. I haven't been able to pay full rent for 3 months. I didn't tell her because I didn't want her to worry more than she already does." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. After everything Emma had done, everything she had taught about love and sacrifice, she and Mrs. Davis were about to lose their home. Michael knew in that moment that his life would never be the same again. Emma hadn't just changed his perspective on human nature. She had awakened something in him that had been buried since grandmother's death. He finally understood what grandmother meant when she said that true wealth came from lifting others, not climbing higher himself. But first, he needed to learn more about what true generosity looked like from the master herself. During the hours that followed, Michael received a complete education in what it meant to live richly despite having little money. Mrs. Davis insisted on cooking dinner for him and refused to let him order takeout despite their obviously limited resources. "We may not have much," Mrs. Davis said while working in her small kitchen, "but we have enough to share with a friend." Emma set the table with fine china. "We have a special guest." Michael watched Emma carefully arrange her few pieces of good china, plates that had probably been wedding gifts decades ago. She folded paper napkins into neat triangles and found a small vase for a single flower she had picked from a plant on their fire escape. Dinner was simple: pasta with homemade sauce, a small salad, and bread that Mr. Johnson had given. But the conversation was richer than anything Michael had ever experienced at his expensive restaurants. Mrs. Davis told stories about Emma's parents, about their courtship and marriage, about how proud they would have been of their daughter's goodness. "Sarah was like Emma," Mrs. Davis explained. "She was a nurse who always stayed late to comfort scared patients. She never made much money, but she made everyone around her feel valued and cared for. Emma has the same gift." Emma showed Michael her schoolwork and proudly displayed certificates for academic achievement. Despite all the challenges she had faced, her teachers had written notes praising not just her intelligence, but her compassion for struggling classmates. "Emma tutors other children during lunch," Mrs. Davis said. "Instead of playing, she helps kids who are behind in reading. Her teachers say she has a gift for making difficult concepts seem simple." As the evening wore on, Michael began to see how wrong his assumptions about wealth and poverty had been. This small apartment contained more genuine happiness and love than his penthouse had ever known. Mrs. Davis and Emma had created a home where every possession had meaning, every moment together was precious, every small joy was celebrated. "Mr. Anderson," Mrs. Davis said, while serving tea in delicate cups that clearly had sentimental value, "may I ask you something personal? Do you have family? People who love you?" Michael realized with a shock that he couldn't honestly answer yes. He had business partners, employees, people who wanted things from him, but love, genuine, unconditional love, like he witnessed between Mrs. Davis and Emma. "My grandmother raised me," Michael said slowly. "She died 5 years ago. She was the last person who loved me for who I was, instead of what I could provide." Emma reached across the small table and took his hand. "She's watching over you," she said simply. "Grandma Dorothy says grandmothers never really leave us. They just love us from a different place." Michael felt tears he hadn't shed in years threaten to overflow. These two people, who had every reason to be bitter about life's unfairness, were comforting him and sharing their emotional wealth as generously as they had shared their simple meal. "I want to help you," Michael said suddenly. "I want to do more than just today's shopping trip. I want to help you keep your apartment, make sure Emma gets a good education, make sure Mrs. Davis gets proper medical care." Mrs. Davis shook her head gently. "That's very kind, Mr. Anderson. But we're not your responsibility. Emma and I will find a way." "But I want to help," Michael insisted. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and I've never used it for anything that mattered." Emma looked at him thoughtfully. "Grandma Dorothy says the best way to help people is to help them help themselves. Maybe you could find a way to do that." Her words triggered something in Michael's mind. Emma was right. Charity wasn't the answer. But what if there was a way to create opportunities instead of just giving handouts? What if his wealth could be a tool for empowering people like Mrs. Davis and Emma instead of just accumulating more for himself? As he prepared to leave that evening, Michael realized that Emma had given him something far more valuable than what he had given her. She had shown him a path back to the person grandmother had raised him to be. But he had no idea that Emma had one more lesson to teach him, one that would connect his past to his present in the most unexpected way. As Michael prepared to leave Mrs. Davis and Emma's apartment, something on the small mantelpiece caught his attention. Among Emma's school pictures and drawings was an old black and white photograph that made his blood freeze. The photograph showed a young woman in a 1950s dress next to a tall, handsome man in military uniform. Michael recognized the woman immediately. It was his grandmother, Margaret Anderson, when she was young, but he didn't recognize the man beside her. "Mrs. Davis," Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. "Where did this photograph come from?" Mrs. Davis looked confused for a moment, then followed his gaze to the mantelpiece. "Oh, that's my late husband, James Davis, with his girlfriend Margaret back in 1950. He was stationed at Fort Hamilton before the Korean War. They were engaged, but she broke it off when he got his deployment orders. He said she was afraid of becoming a war widow." The room began to spin around Michael. "Margaret Anderson was your husband's girlfriend. Do you know that name?" Mrs. Davis asked in surprise. "Margaret Anderson was my grandmother," Michael said, sinking into the nearest chair. "She raised me after my parents died." Emma looked from one to the other, sensing the magnitude of this revelation, even though she couldn't fully understand it yet. Mrs. Davis sat down heavily, studying Michael's face with new recognition. Good heavens! James talked about Margaret until his dying day. He said she was the love of his life, but that she chose to marry a wealthy man instead of waiting for a soldier with an uncertain future. Michael's mind raced through everything grandmother had told him about her youth. She had mentioned a great love she had lost in the war, but he had always assumed the man had died in battle. She had never told him that she had chosen financial security over love. "James came back from the war in 1954 and met my sister Maria," Mrs. Davis continued. "They married 6 months later. Maria died when Sarah was 15, and James raised our daughter alone. He was a good father, but always carried a sadness about the woman who got away. Emma had been observing both adults carefully, reading their expressions and body language. She took Michael's phone and wrote, "Are you family?" Michael looked at this little girl who had already changed his life so profoundly. Now discovering their connection went deeper than either could have imagined. "In a way, yes," he said gently. "If your grandmother's grandfather, James, had married my grandmother, Margaret, your grandmother would have been my great-aunt, and you would be my great-cousin." Mrs. Davis wiped her eyes with a shaking hand. "James always wondered what happened to Margaret. He said she was the kindest and most generous person he ever knew. He would have been so happy to know she lived a good life and raised someone like you." But Michael felt shame instead of pride. "Mrs. Davis, I'm not sure I'm the person James would have hoped I'd become. Until I met Emma today, I had forgotten everything grandmother taught me about goodness and generosity." Emma took both their hands, creating a circle of connection across generations and lost love stories. "Maybe that's why Mr. Michael found me today," she wrote with one hand. "Maybe Grandma Margaret and great-grandfather James wanted us to meet." Michael realized Emma was right. This was no coincidence. It was the universe conspiring to teach him the most important lesson of his life. His grandmother and James Davis, two people who had loved and lost each other more than 60 years ago, had somehow brought their families together through the pure heart of a 7-year-old girl. Sometimes life's most important connections happen when we least expect them. If you believe in fate, leave a comment and share your experience. Everything was about to change, not just for Emma and Mrs. Davis, but for Michael's understanding of his purpose in the world. The next morning, Michael woke up in his penthouse apartment with a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt since he was Emma's age. The luxury around him, the imported marble, designer furniture, original artworks worth more than most people's homes, felt hollow and meaningless. He spent the morning making phone calls that would have shocked his business partners. Instead of discussing mergers and acquisitions, he spoke with lawyers about establishing a foundation. Instead of reviewing quarterly profit reports, he researched programs for deaf children and elderly care initiatives. By lunchtime, Michael had created the Margaret and James Foundation, named after his grandmother and the man she had loved and lost. The foundation would focus on 3 areas: providing hearing aids and medical equipment for families who couldn't afford them, supporting single grandparents raising grandchildren, and creating educational opportunities for children facing exceptional challenges. His first call was to Dr. Sarah Collins at the medical store. "I want to establish a program," Michael explained. "Any child or elderly person who needs hearing aids but can't afford them should receive them free of charge. I'll cover all costs." His second call was to Mr. Robert Thompson at the pharmacy. "I want to create a medication assistance program for families like Mrs. Davis and Emma. No one should have to choose between vital medicines and food." His third call was to Mr. William Johnson. "I'd like to help you expand your store and hire more community members. Places like yours are the heart of neighborhoods." But Michael knew that individual acts of charity, while important, weren't enough. Emma had taught him that real change came from empowering people to lift themselves. That afternoon, he returned to Queens with a proposal that would honor everything Emma had shown about dignity and independence. "Mrs. Davis," Michael said as they sat in the small living room, "I have an idea. What if instead of just paying your rent, I hired you to lead the community outreach program for my new foundation? You know this neighborhood, understand what families need, and have the wisdom that only comes from facing real challenges." Mrs. Davis's eyes widened. "Mr. Anderson, I'm 74 years old. I never finished college. I have no business experience." "You have something more valuable," Michael replied. "You have the ability to see people's hearts and understand what they truly need. Emma learned her compassion from you. I need someone who thinks like you both." Emma bounced excitedly in her chair. "Grandma Dorothy would be perfect. She knows everyone in the building, everyone in our neighborhood. People trust her." Michael smiled at Emma's enthusiasm. "And Emma, I'd like you to be our youngest advisor. You'll help us understand what children in situations like yours really need, not what adults think they need." Over the weeks that followed, Mrs. Davis threw herself into the foundation work with energy that surprised everyone. She created networks of grandparents supporting each other, organized community resource sharing, and identified families who needed help but were too proud to ask. Emma became the foundation's unofficial ambassador, visiting other children with hearing impairments and showing them that their disability didn't define their possibilities. Michael found himself spending more time in Queens than in his corporate offices. He learned that true wealth didn't come from accumulating money, but from watching that money transform lives and create opportunities. But the deepest change was in Michael himself. For the first time since grandmother's death, he felt connected to something larger than his own success. He was honoring the love story between Margaret and James by creating the family they never got the chance to build together. As Christmas approached, Michael realized that Emma had given him the greatest gift of all. She had helped him find his way back to the person grandmother had always believed he could become. The foundation was just the beginning. Michael had plans that would surprise everyone, especially Emma, and prove that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes in the world. 6 months later, Michael stood in the exact same spot in Central Park where he had first met Emma. The bench where she had sat alone was now surrounded by children laughing and playing, their hearing aids gleaming in the spring sunlight. The Margaret and James Foundation had grown beyond his wildest expectations, but today marked something even more special. "Are you nervous?" asked Mrs. Davis, approaching with Emma bouncing beside her. Both women looked transformed. Mrs. Davis was healthier and more energetic than she had been in years, and Emma radiated the confidence of a child who knew she was deeply loved and valued. "Terrified," Michael admitted with a laugh. "I've given presentations to boards of directors and international investors, but this feels bigger than anything I've ever done." Emma took his hand and squeezed it gently. "You'll be perfect," she said, her clear voice still a miracle to him after all these months. "Grandma Dorothy and I are so proud of you." Today was the official opening of the Margaret and James Community Center. Built on a lot that had once housed an abandoned warehouse in Queens, the center would offer free hearing screenings, educational support, job training, and most importantly, a place where families could gather and support each other. But the real reason Michael felt nervous had nothing to do with the ribbon-cutting ceremony or the speeches he would give. Today, he was going to ask Emma and Mrs. Davis a question that would change all their lives forever. As the ceremony began, Michael looked at the crowd that had gathered. Mr. William Johnson was there with his family, his wife Helen, now cancer-free, and his grandson Tyler, thriving in the Foundation's after-school programs. Dr. Sarah Collins had partnered to open a satellite clinic at the center. Mr. Robert Thompson from the pharmacy had established a medication assistance program that had helped dozens of families. The mayor gave a speech about community partnerships. Local news reporters interviewed families whose lives had been transformed by the Foundation's work. But Michael's attention kept drifting to Emma, who was watching everything with wide eyes and occasionally signing to other deaf children who had become her close friends. When it was Michael's turn to speak, he walked to the podium with Emma by his side. She had insisted on being part of his speech, saying she had something important to add. If you're excited to discover what happens next, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the end of this incredible story. 6 months ago, Michael began, his voice carrying clearly through the crowd. I was a very rich, but very empty man. I thought I understood human nature. I believed people were fundamentally selfish, that everyone had a price, that kindness was just a weakness that successful people couldn't afford. He looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. Then I met a 7-year-old girl who proved I was completely wrong. When I gave Emma unlimited purchasing power, expecting her to reveal the greed I thought existed in everyone, she instead revealed humanity's incredible capacity for love and altruism that exists in the human heart. Emma stepped up to the microphone. Mr. Michael tested me that day, she said, her young voice strong and clear. But I think maybe God was testing him too. Sometimes we meet people exactly when we need them most. The crowd was completely silent, absorbing every word. Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion. Emma taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It's measured in the lives you touch, the people you lift up, the love you give and receive. She showed me that grandmother's values, the ones I had forgotten in my pursuit of success, were the only values that truly counted. He paused and looked at Mrs. Davis, who was wiping tears from her eyes. But Emma gave me an even greater gift than wisdom. She gave me family. Michael knelt down to Emma's level, right there in front of everyone. Emma Davis, you taught me what it means to be truly rich. You showed me that love multiplies when you give it away, that kindness creates more kindness, that the smallest acts of generosity can change the world. Emma's eyes widened as Michael pulled out a small velvet box. This isn't an engagement ring, Michael said with a laugh that broke the tension. It's something entirely different. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold locket. This belonged to my grandmother, Margaret. Inside is a picture of her with your grandmother's grandfather, James, taken the day they got engaged in 1950. Emma gasped and took the locket with reverent hands. Margaret and James could never build a family together, but through you, their love story finally has a happy ending. Emma, would you and Mrs. Davis do me the honor of becoming my family? Would you let me adopt you as my daughter and Mrs. Davis as my mother? The crowd exploded in cheers and applause, but Michael only had eyes for Emma's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she whispered in his ear. Yes, yes, yes. I always wanted a daddy who would love me no matter what. Mrs. Davis was openly sobbing now, and Michael stood to embrace her too. My dear boy, she said through her tears, Margaret and James are dancing in heaven now. As all three hugged each other in front of the community that had embraced them, Michael realized that Emma's greatest gift hadn't been teaching him about generosity or kindness or the true meaning of wealth. Her greatest gift had been showing him the way home. The little girl who had bought hearing aids instead of toys, medicine instead of candy, and food for others instead of treats for herself, had healed a broken man's heart and reunited two families across generations. 6 months earlier, Michael had stood in his corner office feeling empty despite his billions. Today, he stood in a community center surrounded by people who loved him, not for what he could give them, but for who he had chosen to become. Emma had passed his test with flying colors, but more importantly, she had helped him pass the most important test of all, the test of what kind of person he wanted to be for the rest of his life. As they walked home together, truly home for the first time in Michael's adult life, Emma slipped her little hand into his. Daddy Michael, she said softly. Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for letting me buy what my heart wanted that day. Michael squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for showing me what my heart needed all along. And the little girl who had chosen love over luxury had created a family, healed a community, and proved that sometimes the smallest people carry the biggest hearts. And by choosing to love Emma and Mrs. Davis, Michael Anderson finally understood what grandmother had been trying to teach him all those years, that the only wealth that truly counts is the wealth you share with others, and the only legacy worth leaving is a legacy of love. If this story changed your perspective on what really matters in life, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch hearts and transform lives.